5, 4, 3. The microphone is high. It's where you want to be. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2. Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday, and welcome back to the Inner Circle podcast, where real estate meets real life. Hosted by yours truly, your homegirl, Jillian. So we are coming to you live on intellectualradio.com, YouTube, and across my social media platforms. Don't worry if you missed the live show today. This episode and all others are available to stream on intellectualradio.com's YouTube channel, iHeartRadio, and my social media platforms for you to listen anytime and anywhere. So the Inner Circle podcast is your ultimate destination for real talk about real estate, whether you're a first-time homebuyer, an inspiring investor, or a seasoned in buying, selling, or flipping homes. Each week, we tackle the real-life challenges and opportunities in the real estate world and explore how they impact you. So why is this podcast so important? Because real estate isn't just about buying or selling. It's connected to so many parts of our lives, from building generational wealth and creating financial stability to managing properties and understanding laws that affect landlords and tenants. So real estate is real life, and sharing lessons and experience helps all of us grow and succeed. So today we're diving into an incredibly important topic for real estate investors and landlords: understanding eviction laws, tenant rights, and the critical role real estate attorneys play in protecting your investments. I'm excited to welcome my guest today, Chuks Onyezia, a highly experienced Chicago-based real estate attorney who specializes in evictions and real estate transactions. Chuks isn't just an attorney, he's also my friend, but he's also a real estate investor, landlord, and property flipper, which gives him a unique perspective on the legal and practical sides of real estate. He's here to help us unpack the eviction process, explain tenant and landlord rights, and share some of his best advice for landlords who want to stay compliant with the law while protecting their bottom line. So if you're a landlord, investor, or thinking about becoming one, this episode is for you. Don't forget, we also want you to be a part of the conversation. Call us live at 708-223-8953 with your questions, thoughts, or experiences. So don't be shy out there. Your question might just help another investor or landlord. So let's welcome Chuks to the Inner Circle podcast. If I had a background, I would say yay, but
I'm yaying on the inside.
You're yaying on the inside, right?
Thank you so much,
Thank you for being here. So I'm excited to have you.
I was listening to your introduction. I'm thinking, like, who is that? I'm like, oh, that's me.
That is you. That is you.
I got it.
Yep, that's you. So let's start by just telling our viewers and our listeners a little bit about your background, more than what I shared. And then we're going to get into talking about, the critical role an attorney plays in real estate transactions, and then we'll get into what you specialize in is eviction. So we'll kind of go down that road.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for that. You pretty much hit most things on the head. I am a real estate attorney. I focus mainly on landlord-tenant, so evictions and closings, but I do all things real estate. Going way back when we met. I'm a recovering engineer, so we met in college. I'm not going to say what year, because then
please don't.
I'm still pushing 20s, 30s, something. So,
right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what I've been doing, and I'm also an investor. I'm a broker, even though I stay in my lane. Me becoming a broker was based on necessity back in 2008 and 12 when real estate was cheap, and it was hard to get somebody to take you to a property that's listed for $10,000 or so. Those days, I miss those days,
right?
But I've been working as an attorney for over 20 years, and I'm not just an attorney. I'm also a client myself. I deal with I'm a landlord. I'm pushing over 25 units and going, and hopefully, get to 100 one day. But I've learned a lot during the process and willing to share. So as counsel or for myself, I'm willing to learn and willing to share and help people get to that goal.
Nice.
Because there's tons out there.
Absolutely.
So there's no need to compete. So we can give this game for free.
Please, we're gonna give it up today, because I know we got a lot of people out there that want to know the role of a real estate attorney. I get that question a lot. Do I need an attorney in order to buy property? And I always say, well, if you want to protect your investment, and investment could be your actual home that you are going to occupy or something that you are going to rent out, right? So why wouldn't you want an attorney to look over the contract, any other closing documents, things like that? So I feel like it's a critical role. and a critical necessity for any buyer here in the state of Illinois. I know every state has different requirements, whether an attorney is required or not, but I'm sure you'll get into that. But I always say to my clients, here are my recommended attorneys, and I recommend that you have an attorney.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
So, is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, it's from your perspective.
So if I put my attorney hat on, I'm going to say, talking absolute. So do you need one? No, you don't. But do I recommend you? Do I recommend you to have one? I do, depending on who you are. Perfect example. Let me ask this question: Are you bilingual?
I am not.
But you're a very educated woman. You're very knowledgeable, right?
I am.
Do you need an interpreter? I mean, you can easily take a Spanish to English dictionary and word by word you can do that. But by having somebody that can interpret the language for you, it saves you time, it saves you energy, and what you can get from, let's say, a Spanish to English dictionary is just the word and the translation, but you're not getting the dialect, the unwritten meanings and the culture and so forth. That's how I like to look at an attorney in real estate. If you want to spend that time and you really want to go for it, you can. Anybody can, and you'll learn that skill. But there's so many other issues that you may not see. And by hiring an attorney, you deal with somebody who regularly deals with every permutation or every computation or every possible thing that you may never have foreseen and can work in that direction. Contracts can be difficult. I mean, even for attorneys, terms are changing, and sometimes the regular language of a contract is not the same as our regular understanding. And so it's advocacy. I mean, I would recommend everybody that doesn't regularly practice in a particular area to get an agent, get somebody who can advocate for your well-being. And unless you want to spend full time doing that, so but it's recommended. There are a lot of pitfalls that you can. I know we're going to talk about some of those shortly, but I would recommend it.
It's the fine print, right? That's kind of how I look at it. I don't want to say I necessarily look at it like that because I'm experienced and I know how to read contracts. But to the average person who's not in the real estate world, they're looking at a purchase contract or even a listing. Just looking at the information on a regular listing and being able to understand some of the jargon, right, of a contract or legal documents that come in the transaction process. Like it's just trying to read the fine print, right, and what they don't know.
Yes, I mean I don't like the word fine print no more in that because it's not really fine print. That goes back to a day where they put the print real small and try to sneak it in there. But it's a lengthy contract. What is the typical contract is a 13-page contract.
Yeah.
But when you're purchasing a property, that's not the only contract you deal with. You also have the lending agreement. You also have a lot of the terms of if you are borrowing money towards that. You also have the analysis of the title and what's worth of the zoning certification, the water, and finding out reading a building inspection report. So they're more than just the actual original contract, but you can read the fine print and not know what's going on. I mean, one key example is tax prorations.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say tax prorations. You tax prorate at 100%. You understand what that means,
right?
But what's the nuance? What's the difference between 100%, 105%, 110%, or even something customized for a particular situation? Who's going to give you that information to understand why the strategy involved,
what it is, and why it is, and all of that, right?
And why it is, and what the importance of it is, and it's a negotiation. And usually, if you have a broker, your negotiation is started with the broker.
Right.
But I guess the disclaimer here is it's not done with the broker. There's a lot of negotiations that's done from lawyer to lawyer in a particular contract. The amendments, the changes, and the shifts in the contract, and that still has to be negotiated. But the importance and what I normally do is a real estate attorney is there to make sure what you negotiated is enforced. Some people think it's in the contract, it's done. You can still have things in the contract that don't end up getting enforced later on, and some things fall through the cracks. Some people forget. You have a listing. I had one recently last week where there was a listing that said it's a double lot, and we got to the closing. Well, we moved through the process, and there's no double lot. So sometimes, and not to blame brokers, but sometimes they may put something on a listing. It may be inherited from a previous listing, or they may look at it and say, this is a big lot, so let's just call it double lot because you have room on the side. Or they may not know where there's an empty lot next to it, and they don't realize that's not being transferred.
Exactly.
So having an attorney to weed through that process and discover that before you put your money and your dollars in the line is, something that most recently I had to deal with. So
right, and just to kind of give people an idea of where the real estate attorney comes into play. So as a realtor, I like to introduce the attorneys as I'm getting to know my client and let them know so they can start thinking about who's the attorney they want to use. I refer attorneys. I have a list of attorneys that I give to clients, and so we inform them of why we believe or recommend that an attorney should be used. Here's a list of attorneys, but as far as an introduction or you guys really coming on board, it really happens after we go under contract, right? So you talk a little bit about how that process, like you introduce yourself to the client, how you get involved and start working once we are under contract.
Understood. Well, two examples. So what are we talking about? Clients that are buying or selling?
Either one.
Okay, so typically the way it works is that a buyer, a purchaser of real estate will talk to their broker first. They'll hire a real estate broker and they'll start looking at properties, which I'm going to switch the order what it should be, but they talk to the broker first. The broker may introduce them, start showing them properties, and they'll introduce them to a lawyer, and they'll see if there's a good fit and we'll move forward. If the world was perfect, I would actually say a buyer should, the first person they should talk to is their lender, and find out what they can afford. Because how many times have you shown property and I just realized you can't afford these properties. You say you want to.
Well, I don't show property unless you are pre-approved. So that is a message out there to anybody looking to work with me in the future. We are going to get you pre-approved first. If you're not a cash buyer, we're going to get you pre-approved. Gotcha. But no, that is the first step is you need to know what you can afford, right? And getting your team. I talk about that on the show is getting your real estate team together. And a part of my team or the team that I present to people is me, myself, the broker, an attorney, an inspector, the lender. This is the core team that you put together. When I refer or after we go under contract, you guys come into play, and then that really starts what I thought you were going to kind of jump into it, but I'm going to lead you that way. The attorney review period. So I kind of want to touch on that a little bit because that's where we get into the nuts and bolts of like inspections after going back and forth to negotiate repairs with a seller on the buyer's behalf. So kind of get into that area.
So once your clients have entered into a contract, and now this conversation right now is talking about clients that are buying, right? In particular, there's a different process for
on the seller side.
If you're buying a property and you already have a fully executed contract, you're hopefully as soon as possible you send that contract, a fully executed contract, to your attorney. And when it comes to my desk, what we do is first thing we do in my office is we come up and we create a timeline. Because that contract is going to be the rules. It's going to detail the rules of this engagement, of this transaction. And, you have certain markers. So obviously the first marker would be earnest money is due. Usually it's between 1, 2, 3 days, 3 business days.
2 to 3 days, business days, yeah.
And you can fill it in whatever the contract says. And the importance of making sure that's done properly is if you miss that date, you're in default of the contract and a seller can walk away. Because you haven't fulfilled it, the contract's not enforceable yet because you don't have that first part of it. But assuming all that goes right, you have an attorney review and you have an inspection review period. Typically it's 5 days, it can be adjusted. And what that is it's a period, typically 5 business days, that allows the buyer and the seller to adjust terms of the contract. So I get other brokers, not you of course, but I get other brokers that sometimes leave certain things blank in the contract. And so that period is an opportunity to fill in those blanks and to really paint the picture of what was truly negotiated, what the understanding was. During that time, if a buyer would like repairs, that hopefully that time is enough time for them to do their inspection, their home inspection, their reviews, kind of kick the tires and find out what's really going on. During that period, that's when you can ask for those things. Hopefully the inspection report comes in, you have a good home inspector that can give you nuts and bolts of what's really happening and beneath the surface, what's going on with the property. And then we go back to negotiations. If that's a price reduction, if that's a repair credit, if that's a actual repair, we go back to negotiation and see if that works. And it's important to do that during that time period.
So here's a question I just, as I listen to you talk, I don't know that I've ever asked you this, and you've worked with me for years, so you kind of know how I work. I'm very proactive, right? So when it comes to inspections, because that's a key, that's a big part of buying real estate when you're buying a property and you want to go back to the seller to ask for repairs. But whose responsibility is it really to ask for those things, broker or attorney?
Oh, it's the attorney.
Okay.
Your job. So once you, so we have to be careful. We have to protect our brokers from the illegal practice of law, and we have to know that their job is to negotiate a contract and fill in a template contract. Really, you shouldn't be changing, amending contracts. That should be done with an attorney. A lot of brokers like to do that negotiation and start, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you're working well with a broker, then that broker is not so much changing the contract, but kind of sticking their pinky toe in the water with the other broker to see will they be acceptable to these changes, so we can have the attorneys draft it up. But it's definitely the attorney's responsibility after a contract is done, and it should be done during the attorney review period. There's no broker review period; it's an attorney review period, so they can say we're denying this contract based on these problems, or we're requesting a modification to the contract based on what we discovered, which can be repair requests, which can be the biggest one is finding out that the tax assessment has increased. So, taxes are in arrears. So sometimes you'll know that the assessor has changed the value of a property drastically. And so sometimes you go back and you negotiate a higher proration. And I can get into that later. Taxes get boring. But yes, that's definitely, to answer your question, that's definitely an attorney's responsibility. Allow that attorney to do that during that period. Like I said, in the contract, it's 5 business days. It is extendable, so that's one modification. If you need more time, you can request your attorney to extend that period. Maybe the inspector can't get out there until the 6th day, so your attorney will definitely send a modification to extend that attorney review period to, one, to protect your earnest money, to make sure you don't lose it, but two, to make sure that what you actually want in the property is communicated and is contractually on paper.
Got it. So I know that during that period, that's when a lot of complexities come up, right? So let's talk a little bit about, because I know both of us work with a lot of investors. You are an investor. So like, how do you help investors navigate complex deals? So such as like distressed properties, multi-unit buildings, or properties even with liens. So.
Well, so it's that's part of the process. It's one of those situations. So how do it's investors, non-investors, first-time homebuyers, they're all the same problems that could happen. With an investor, there tends to be more issues, more complexities based on their type of funding. So, as an attorney, if you're dealing with commercial lenders, if you're dealing with hard money loans or other different type of lending tools, that's something that an investor should be aware of what those stipulations are. Because as an investor, as a true investor, based on your lending, you don't have the same protections as a homeowner that's going to live there. There's a lot of laws in Illinois that protect homeowners, homestead exemptions, and protects you. Even foreclosures. A foreclosure with somebody who's living in a property, it's their primary residence. There's a whole legal process that can take 2, sometimes 3 years. If you're an investor and you're buying an investment loan, that can be done in 6 weeks, 6 months sometimes to assignment. So just knowing what you're getting into, knowing what your money looks like, knowing what the stipulations of them are. Another thing that we help investors is to make sure you know what you're buying. A lot of people don't know what they're purchasing. When you talk about complex deals, what I hate the most is when investors or people come in and say, I have a great deal. I want to buy this. I want to buy it now. Do a quick claim deed. Like, you're giving up a lot of the protections. You're giving up a lot of the search strategies, and people don't really understand what a quick claim deed is. A quick claim, and it's not quick. It's quick. Quick claim deed is, it's basically saying, I make no warrants about this property, but whatever interest I have in the property, I'm going to give to you. Now, what happens if I have no interest in the property? What if I truly am not the owner? You have a piece of paper that's worth nothing because that's not the true owner. And typically, when you have probate and different issues, you think this person is the sole heir, and we all know sometimes we find family members out the woodwork
that come out of nowhere, right?
So the person you thought had 100% ownership only owns one-fourth.
Right.
So weeding through navigating through those type of deals, making sure that we focus on warranty deeds where there's an insurance policy on the transaction, making sure that, most importantly, the property is authorized for the use that you want it for. So there's many times where people have a 3 flat, but I realized later on it's really a 2 flat with a basement that's not really authorized. So so just making sure you know what you're buying. We educate you on what the asset actually is and what you can use it for. And that's key for investors because they think they're sitting on something that's a 4 unit and it's really just a 2 unit.
Right?
With some illegal
units,
right, in the basement, and then they wonder why when it's time for them to flip it or sell it. So helping navigate that process, making sure the zoning is accurate, making sure there's no liens, there's no existing liens on it. There's nothing wrong with it if there's a lien on it, but it should be cleared up during the transaction, and just making sure it is.
So can you share an example for our viewers of, a transaction where your legal expertise prevented a major issue?
I think I just talked about two of them.
I know we've had some.
Yeah, we've had some doozies.
Yeah.
We've had some doozies. Let me think about that one. That's a good question. So one particular. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. One particular example. Well, let me actually play for the flip side and tell you how the lack of legal expertise
either way,
on the other side.
Right.
So this is the deal we had together, the Blue House
in Washington Heights.
Heights.
On the south side of Chicago.
Yeah. So we worked on this. I think it was two transactions because it was the purchase and the sale of it and a potential sale of it. So bought a property.
Sorry, we thought we had a caller, but we're gonna hang that up. And maybe the caller will call back. But keep going.
So we had a client that bought a property and they wanted to fix up the property and they wanted to flip it, which was fine. When they purchased the property, there was a lot of attraction to the property and people wanted to buy it even before the work was done. Yeah. And our mutual client agreed to say, okay, we'll see if we can sell it before the work is done, before work is started. And I was the attorney for the seller. Well, he purchased the property, and now they were going to be the seller. And I believe you had a client an interested buyer.
I had an interested buyer
that wanted to buy the property.
Right.
We entered into a contract, and there was just a delay. There was the money was funny, and there was a delays. And the buyer did not. Well, I don't know if they listened to their legal advice or just didn't follow it. But for some reason, the buyer went ahead, accessed the property, was trespassing basically, and started to do work.
It was a mold issue, right? And they started to remediate mold on their own without letting me know or letting I don't even think their broker or their attorney knew. We kind of just found out by happenstance that they had entered the property and started doing this work.
They entered the property. I'm assuming they had access to the property because their broker must have given them the lockbox and access to it. And what they did was they started making improvements on the property, tore down walls in the basement, they remediated mold, and I think they were just really set that this was going to close. And lo and behold, their money was funny. They were not able to purchase the property, and all the work and all the money they spent to do whatever they did without approval when they were trespassing was lost. And had they consulted with their legal, they would have told them, do not touch that property. I don't care if the deal is scheduled for closing tomorrow, wait until then. You should spend you'll spend money on your home inspection and so forth, your appraisal, but don't renovate a property that's not yours. And so that's a situation where had I been on the other side, I would have strictly said, no, you don't own this property. You actually, you have certain liabilities too. That could have cost. So if they did some renovation on the place and let's say the house burned down, not only could the insurance deny the claim saying it didn't work because they didn't have the proper insurance for that particular situation, but they would have been liable. They could have been personally liable for their negligence in renovating the place without permission and trespassing. Criminally too, because they actually were trespassing. So that's one situation on the flip side. But it happens all the time.
Yeah, stuff like that. Right. I think in that situation, that was the first time I'd ever experienced a buyer coming in, and I've heard other realtors talk about this. That they've had, especially for investment properties, buyers come in and just do all kind of things without the listing side knowing about it. But yeah, that was a great story to share because that was a prime example. I want to kind of move in a little bit into evictions, right? Because I know that's your specialty.
Yeah.
So
I love them.
I know, right? Anytime he's like, you got a landlord that needs to kick somebody out, I refer them to Chuks. But let's talk about the overview. Let's just give an overview of the eviction process.
Oh, okay. So in Cook County.
Yeah. So or I guess I don't want to say overview. Let's go step by step. I know we don't have a whole bunch of time, but like a step by step breakdown of the eviction process in Chicago.
So to start an eviction process, here's what you have to prove. And when a landlord has a delinquency or a lease violation, either that is they're not paying rent or some other violation of lease, they can start forward with an eviction. That would be a for-cause eviction. If you have for cause and you have no cause eviction, no cause means tenant didn't do anything wrong. You're just not renewing the lease for whatever reason. So there's two different stages, two different type of evictions. So for the for cause, that's the one where there's obviously a good guy and a bad guy. Somebody's not paying rent and they have to get out. And that's where more landlords have problems. You have to start the process. One, you have to have superior ownership in the property. People don't understand that part.
Define superior ownership.
Superior ownership. You have to be the sole person or majority person that can make those decisions. Where does that come into place? If you have children, their parents have passed and they all own the property evenly, one person can't evict the other person because they don't have superior ownership. They have equal ownership to the property. So you can't evict a co-owner. Me and you own a property together. I can't evict you if you're not paying. We have to go through a court, get assigned an administrator to deal with that. So you have to have superior ownership or permission from superior ownership. So you have to be the owner. You have to be an agent of the owner, property manager with a contract. You have to prove that in court later on. You also have to have an agreement. So you can't evict if there's no agreement. Well, there's one instance where you can with squatters, but there has to be an agreement, either written or verbal. That counts.
An agreement to evict, or
a lease.
A lease. Okay, that's right.
You can evict somebody because you have an agreement to lease
with terms and requirements, right? And you violated those terms and requirements on the lease.
If it's an unwritten lease, sometimes they won't have the terms and requirements, but it will be understood based on history that you've made 3 payments every month for $1,000. So it's clear that the agreement was you're going to live here and you're going to pay $1,000. I don't advise letting anybody rent a property without a lease agreement. But if you don't, that's not the say all be all. You can still evict if you don't have them. So you have to have an agreement. You have to have a breach of agreement, with the exception of you have to have a breach of agreement or an expiration of the agreement, and that would be non-payment of rent, lease violation, or the lease has expired and landlord is not deciding not to renew. Next, you have to have notice. Notice has to be given. You have to personally serve the tenants or anybody age 13 or above that is in possession of that property. You have to give them a notice. If they're not paying rent in Illinois, it's a 5-day notice. If they have a lease violation in Illinois, it's a 10-day notice. There's a little bit nuance in Chicago versus the suburb, but it's a 10-day notice. If you're just not renewing their lease, they've changed it since COVID. It used to be a 30-day notice. Now it's a means test now. So it's a 30-day if they've been there for less than 6 months. It's a 60-day in Chicago, if they've been there under 2 years. And it's a 120-day notice if they've lived in the place for 3 years or more. And that's just something for COVID. They figured if you've been in a place for 10 years, 30 days, and you've done nothing wrong, 30 days is not enough to really uproot you like that. So that's what they've done. In suburban Cook County, they don't have the 120 days, it maxes out the 60-day notice. But that's what you need. You need that notice. Once you give that notice, you have to wait till that notice expires, and then you're greenlit to file your eviction complaint with the courts. Evictions have to be done with the courts and through the Cook County Sheriff.
And that's where you come in, right? That's where, because at what point do I contact an eviction attorney or you to say, hey, I've got a tenant that I want to evict?
As soon as possible.
Okay.
As soon as possible.
Okay.
Don't wait till, if you know what you're doing, you should always contact the attorney beforehand.
Okay. In those steps, I just wanted to kind of get people.
In those steps, as soon as there's a violation.
Okay.
As soon as there's a violation of the lease or as soon as you decide you don't want to renew. So a lot of people think that you can't evict until they're delinquent a month or 2 months. If your lease says rent is due on the 1st, they're late on the 2nd. You can start that 5-day notice on the 2nd. That grace period in the standard leases does not mean you have a grace period to pay. It just means you have a grace period where a fee for being late won't be a charge. But you're still late. You're still late on the 2nd. You're still late on the 3rd. So at that point, that's when you should contact the attorney immediately to make sure. What you do not want to happen, imagine this. Imagine you give a tenant a 30-day notice. and then you give it to your attorney, and the attorney files it, and we file a case, and it goes through the court system, and we finally get to the point where we're doing the eviction hearing, and then we find out then months later that, oh yeah, that wasn't proper, and we have to start all over. So that's why you want to make sure that an attorney drafts or approves that notice first.
Okay.
So that's what I would suggest. It will save you a lot of time.
So we've got the notice, and next step would be
have your attorney file a court case.
Okay.
File a complaint. It's a forcible entry and detainer. It's a joint action or a single action eviction. Joint action meaning you're asking for possession of property along with money damages. Single action is you just want them out. You just want possession of property. There's reasons. There's methods between the two. But I encourage joint actions because it gives you some leverage. Because if you really just want the property, you can always negotiate with the tenant later and saying, okay, look, I'll just take off some of the rent. We'll waive that if you leave earlier and not wait for the process to go through, because it is a time-consuming process. I don't want to go too much into the whole court process.
That's great.
But it takes time. It does take time. Tenants do have rights. Ever since COVID, there are a lot more nuances and mandatory mediation and things that are given that allow hopefully a resolution. And I will say this also as a piece of advice. I understand that you're not getting paid. You want to evict because not paying or destroy the property, but just remember the human aspect of it. There are people. Most of the time, people aren't. The majority of tenants are not just doing this for the sake of it. They're having some problem, and there are tons of social resources that can help with that problem. If it's just a money thing, still go through your process, protect your asset. But there's so much rental assistance available if landlords would be willing to adhere to it or to negotiate for it that can help and get you paid. And maybe the tenant had a bad time and they're back, but they just can't get that back rent. There's still rental assistance dollars out there to assist. So just sometimes having a little bit of compassion, but just a little bit. You still have to work. You still have to make sure you move forward.
Right. Yep. Right. So, and I know that's a big deterrent, or just like detractor that I hear from investor clients, or even people that I'm talking to about being a landlord, is they are so afraid of tenants and the eviction process. And I think that's because it's a lack of information or understanding the process, knowing who to talk to. And so that's where someone like you comes in to even have these conversations before I go buy a multi-unit. Like, how do I prepare myself?
So if you're buying them, so two different scenarios.
Multi-unit or single-family home to rent out. I mean, if I'm just going to become a landlord, what are some general tips or things that I need to do to avoid some of these problems? And I know they're not all avoidable, but how can I prepare myself if I need to evict? Like, this is what I need to know. This is what I need to do.
So I would answer that by giving you two scenarios. One scenario, you're thinking about being a landlord and you're buying a property, a multi-unit that already has tenants in them, versus you're buying a property and you plan on putting your own tenants in there. You have more control when it's empty and you put your own tenants in there. How do you avoid the problems? Screen. Majority of the problems that come to my table are with landlords that do not screen or that have reduced their requirements out of desperation and let somebody in there that they know should not have been in the first place. They take a promise, they let a friend or family member in there that they can't say no to, move into a place, or they're just not treating it like a business. So you can screen your tenants. I've heard everything under the sun on why, but in Cook County right now, there's a shortage of housing, and you can screen your tenants. You have the Fair Housing Act. You have to really make sure that you're fair with your screening tactics. Make sure you talk to an attorney to make sure some of your screening criteria is not illegal. But stick with your guns. If you have an income requirement, don't budge on that. See if your income requirement is reasonable and stick to it. Because what's going to happen is you're going to make a provision, and that's going to come back and bite you. But there are great tenants out there. There are great tenants out there that have great history, but just really screen your tenants. Be careful. Analyze documents. Check rental history. Call. Do employment verification. Yeah. Do all these things because it's the small group of bad that outshadows what's going on. So that's the one way you can really focus on not having some of these pitfalls. If you screen somebody, if they have a job, if they're working, if they're reasonable, if they take care of what they're taking care of, we're not saying things aren't going to happen. We're not saying they're not going to get in trouble at one point. But if they have a history of behaving a certain way, when they get in trouble, they're going to communicate with you, and they're probably going to stick with what they normally do, as far as letting you know in advance what's going on and allowing you or allowing themselves to try to proactively come up with solutions before rent's delinquent or before there's an issue. And you have to screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually was a question of mine that I was going to ask. What were your tips on screening? But thank you for getting to that. Another thing that I hear a concern is tenant rights, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we hear it all the time. That's always a major concern or worry for a potential landlord or investor buying a property that they plan to rent out, is because tenants are given a lot of rights, and it is hard to evict. And that's an opinion. I know you're going to have a different perspective, but
so we have to stop looking at the word tenant rights as a curse word or as a negative thing. That's like me saying human rights. Oh my God, people shouldn't have the ability to breathe fresh air. So there are tenants' rights. I think people misunderstand what they are. I'm an eviction attorney and I help landlords primarily. I try my hardest not to help slumlords because I have a conscience and I want to be able to sleep at night. Tenants, people have rights. When you're a landlord, you have responsibilities as a landlord. You have to provide a safe, clean environment for your tenants, and that's one of the rights that they should enjoy. If it's the middle of the winter, like that's not too far off in this area, and yeah, your tenant should have heat. That's a tenant right. They should have heat, and it should be held at a certain temperature. They shouldn't be freezing in there. And I don't think anybody's really against that. I think when they talk about tenants' right in the negative sense, they say it's really more worried about how difficult it is to evict or the lengthiness of the process. And you just have to understand this is a due process situation. You're proposing to the court to take away housing, a need from someone. And so all that is the court saying, we'll hear that, but that's a right that they have. A judge needs to determine that. You can't just call the police and say, get them out. There has to be a process. It's a civil process that needs to be adjudicated and weighed out. And that's all tenants' rights are. I think just to go into it, I think you're talking more about squatters' rights. That's usually what people
That was
have.
My next.
Yeah,
that was my next question. Because that's a big, huge issue here. And especially as I'm in the MLS all the time, and the MLS is the multiple listing service, looking at property that's on the market or off market, and I'll talk to a listing agent or I'll talk to a seller that's like, I've got this tenant that was technically a tenant a year ago on a lease or longer, and at this point they're not paying, they're squatting. We cannot get them out.
So let me clarify that. So that would not be a squatter.
Okay.
That would be a holdover tenant.
Okay.
They entered the property legally. Mm-hmm. They were there. They just stopped paying their rent.
Okay.
And so they are a tenant. They're a holdover tenant. Maybe the holdover is if their lease is expired. They're just not paying rent.
Right.
And so that's a for-cause eviction you have to start. Squatters' rights. Not label people squatters.
Let's define.
A squatter is someone who gained access to the property illegally and has maintained and has established occupancy in the property. They now become a squatter. What does that look like? That is how you avoid that. Landlords, don't go on vacation and have nobody look at your property for more than a week. Somebody should be putting eyes on the vacant property every week. Put an alarm system on there, know who's in and out of that property.
That's landlords, that's for flippers, because squatters is a big problem for folks that are renovating property. So secure up your property, just kind of to piggyback on what you're saying, but yeah.
A squatter will come into your property illegally without the owner's permission, sometimes unbeknownst to them. So not all squatters are trespassers. Some squatters are professional squatters, and they will break into your property and they will live there and they will get a bill in their name. And then after 2 or so weeks, they get what they call squatters' rights. So that's why you have to come to your property every week. Now, this is Chicago, man. People are scamming left and right. And so there's another victimized squatter situation where somebody will come in there, somebody will trespass, they'll break the lock, they'll change the lock, and then they will real quickly take advantage of a desperate population and saying, hey, you can't find a place, your credit's bad, give me $1,500, and that's good for 3 months. And they generate a fake lease.
Those are the scammers, right?
The scammers will turn somebody who's desperate into a squatter, right. And they're like, I don't understand. I paid this person my money. Here's my lease, but that person never had superior ownership in the property, and they turn them into a squatter. And so those are the people that the squatters' rights are really intended to protect. Um, Once you establish occupancy, the police are not there to investigate what's true and what's false. They're there to identify if a crime has been committed and to deal with it right there and then. What the police will say after somebody has established residency, shows them a lease, shows them a utility bill, proof that they've been there for a while, they say, well, this person is an occupant here. It's a civil matter. You have to go through the eviction process and let a judge determine whether this person is a squatter or not, or if they have rights there. And that's basically what squatters' rights are. You can avoid that by checking on your property. Checking on your property. And this has personally happened to me many times. I've had contractors that have been working on a place. It's always when you're almost done. It's always when the block is looking at you put those appliances in.
Absolutely. Or your plumbing, or if your plumbing is in, that's a major thing. Your plumbing, your appliances, your mechanicals, furnace, air conditioner, they're watching.
Yeah. So I had a crew on a Friday, and they weren't coming back till Monday. And I got a call on Monday saying, "Hey, did you change the locks?" I'm like, "No. There's somebody here, and there's air mattresses in there, there's heaters in there, and it was only 2 days, so I had to call the police immediately. Had to tell the police to put their body cam on, and we have a situation. And it was a sad situation. They had leases, but they had not established occupancy.
Your squatters had leases?
They had leases. Somebody
scammed somebody.
Maybe I don't know.
Maybe you don't know, but they had leases with that property address.
They had leases drafted. It wasn't complete because it's easy to get a disappointing lease. And so the police asked them, "How long have you been here?" I said, "We moved in Sunday, and it was Monday." Luckily, it wasn't long enough to establish occupancy. So I had to show proof that I was the owner and what was going on. And the police said, we're giving you 2 hours. You have to get your stuff and get out of here. You're here legally. And if you have a problem, sue whoever you got the lease from. Of course, they couldn't reach them anymore. But that is why you have to check on or have somebody check on your property at least once a week. Because had I waited another 2 weeks, had I waited for a bill to come in their name or some mail to come in their name, it would have been harder. The police would have said, "No, you have to go through a court process," and you don't want to go through months of that. If you're in the middle of working on the property, that could bankrupt an investor because your loan has a term to it, and so you have to move forward. So yeah, check on your property, check on your property, check on your property. Get visual inspections of your property, secure it, make sure you check on it.
That's great. That's great advice. One thing that I've heard, and I don't know how. I'm trying to even figure out the right way to say this, but there's a term that floats out there that is like cash for keys, right?
Yeah.
So that is a real thing, right? Okay.
Absolutely, and you should do it. So you mentioned the eviction process, and since the good old days of the eviction process before COVID was you file your eviction, you get a first hearing date in 2 weeks, and you can probably from start to finish with the order get your eviction in hand in a month. 4 weeks. Now we're so far back. I mean, if it goes without problem, you're talking about at least 4 months for the eviction process. So what I tell owners are, they're people, and they have certain situations, and sometimes you can still negotiate. So what cash for keys is basically saying you have a tenant that you want out, or they're not paying, or some other situation. You can't just terminate the lease. You can't just illegally evict them. So, but if they agree to leave, there's nothing wrong with that. Banks do it all the time with foreclosures. So yeah, as a landlord, if you want to avoid a lengthy eviction process, take the pride out of it and see if you can come up with a negotiation with your tenant or with your former tenant, your non-paying tenant, and say, "I'll offer you this much money if you leave by this date." If they leave in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that's much less than a 4-month, 6-month process.
And me paying an attorney, right?
You paying an attorney, and you paying for a house that you're not getting money for.
That stuff, right?
It's the attorney's fees are not even the issue. Yeah. It's the months that you save in having access to your property and what you're doing. And a lot of landlords, the pride gets in. You haven't paid me. Why would I pay you? Sometimes you have to think about it. And
I mean, you're looking at pros and cons, or I'm looking at the cost of it's going to save me to pay you in the long run, right? So I'm balancing out my costs.
Yeah.
Right.
But what I will say, do not give any money. It's supposed to be same time. So a lot of landlords have gotten this situation where they've offered cash for keys and they gave the cash before they moved out, and then the people change their mind and don't move out. You're not getting that. That's not get it talked about with an attorney. Make sure there's stipulations. Make sure the cash is going to be delivered either the same time that they're giving the keys or after, so you can confirm that they're out. I've had situations where you've done cash for keys, where let's say you have a family or multiple people, and the person you negotiated with left, but they left behind other adults in there, and now you have the whole situation where now I have to evict them, so they're not even a lease, and so you got to make sure you do that right. So you still consult an attorney with your cash keys agreement. You can offer cash keys to your tenant, but when you draft that up, talk to an attorney so you can make sure it sticks.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for that. I know that's a popular tactic that people use, instead of going through the whole eviction process. So I wanted to definitely cover that. I want to talk about towards the end as we get towards wrapping up a little bit about balancing your legal work and investing. So how has being a real estate investor influenced your approach to your legal work? Because I know, you play both roles heavily. I mean, the attorney is being a real estate attorney is your career, but you also have a career as an investor as well. So how do you balance that?
How do I balance it? Like time allocation, or
all of it.
I don't
all
sleep.
Of it. Yeah, right, right. 25 doors. You said you have, right?
So far,
yeah. And he's buying more. So any of my wholesalers out there, I know, right? Anybody that's got property, contact me, and I'll relate to Chuks. But yeah,
it's funny you say that because earlier on when I was buying, I was very aggressive. I was very MLS. I was dealing with this. And as you get a name for yourself, deals start coming to you, and you just sit back, and my inbox is filled with
and you get to pick and choose what you want to take and what you don't, which is a great feeling.
So how has being an investor influenced me on my legal side? It just really reaffirmed that it's all about the numbers. If you want to be a successful investor, you're going to win, lose, or draw by the numbers, by the purchase. You have to get your numbers. You have to make sure your numbers work. If you're going to buy and hold, you have to work backwards. So you have a property, before you put an offer in, ask yourself, what does this property rent for? And then work backwards. If it rents for $1,000, how much is it going to cost me? What did it cost? And you see how much you can make. And you decide what you want to make per unit. So for me, when I first started off, I first started buying properties in Champaign. And I was a grad student. Everything was fine.
That was a smart play. I mean, that was a really, really smart play. I kick myself every time when I think about how inexpensive property was, and we both went to University of Illinois Champaign, and how inexpensive that property, right? How inexpensive the property down there was compared to the city of Chicago. And I know this was years ago, but that was a great investment to get in then, and the equity that you have now. So I'm applauding you for that.
It has challenges, but the point I was trying to make was when I bought there, I was okay with profiting $200-300 a month on a unit after cost and everything. Broke college student, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. In Chicago, when I first came to Chicago, every unit had to do at least 5 a month, and so you'll figure out what 500 a month on each door. So, but you as an investor will figure out what you can deal with, what your time is worth, and how you want to move forward. Now it's a little different. Now I want windfalls, and I want to get those diamonds in the rough. But you figure out, you work backwards. You have to work back, even if you're a flipper. You work backwards. What's the ARV? And if you get a loan as a flipper, your lender is going to help you to make sure those numbers are good because they have a stake in the game too. But you work backwards. You get that final price, and you see how much the costs are, and you hopefully you profit the difference. But being a real estate attorney has helped me really crunch a lot of those numbers and work with my clients a little bit differently to show them the other sides of it. Because when you're dealing with a buyer that just wants to live in a property, a lot of the term sheets with the lending doesn't really get focused on as much because there are a lot of protections in place. If you're a investor and you have hard money lending or commercial lending, they're working with you a little bit, but it's really in favor of them. They have these. Some of them will have assignment of lease terms where what that means is they're not going to go through a long, lengthy foreclosure process. They will take your LLC temporarily for like 2 seconds. They will take your LLC, take the property out of the name of the LLC, put it back to themselves, and then give you back your LLC. So they'll move that foreclosure really quickly. So you have to make sure your numbers are right. You understand your terms because once you get the maturity and you're not able to refinance or sell or so forth, you're in jeopardy of losing that property. And in Chicago, the biggest delay is underestimating how long it takes to get building building permits returned. So you have to incorporate all that. So that's one thing that it's all about practicing. Okay. They call it the practice of law because you get better the more you do it. And so this gives you more experience.
So one of the cornerstones of this podcast is one of the things we talk about is generational wealth, right? It's a lot of the foundation, a lot of these conversations. How did you get started in investing? Like even in Champagne, buying those properties, what was the catalyst or triggered you to say, hey, this is a play or a move that I want to make?
Yeah. So I hate telling that story because there's two parts to the story, but I had a great mentor. I had a great mentor. I have when I was down there, one of my fraternity brothers was an investor, a big time investor in Champaign County. He had over 100 units, and he was willing to talk with me and sit me down and really explain some of the processes and how things work. We would go to the bank and we'd have meetings with his banker. I'd sit in the room and have meetings with his banker about how he liquidates assets to buy more assets. And just being a fly on the wall, I didn't understand most of what was happening at that time. I'm just there, but it's all about exposing yourself to different things. If you're in a room and information is being dissipated, you may only get 1% of it, but that's 1% more than you had the day before. And slowly, the next time you have that conversation, you're like, oh, I understand a little more now, and you figure out what's going on, and then you do your research. Now with the internet, the way it is, you have access to everything, and so just get a good mentor. You don't have to follow everything the mentor does. I can give you advice on how I started off, but I don't like giving that advice because it's a different market now, and so I first started off back in the forbidden no doc loan era, which it hurt a lot of people. But I understood what a no doc loan was, and I understood that stated income and what verifiable income was, and I used that for an investment tool. A lot of people use that to buy their homes, and then they end up losing them to foreclosure because they couldn't afford it. But because I knew how much I can rent the place for, I would never get in trouble and not be able to pay the mortgage as long as I keep it filled. So it worked. There were different tools. When the market crashed in '08, right after that, I was positioned. So, that's when the prices went down and I was able to buy income asset type of properties. And I just really focused on that. That market's not the same market we're in now. Those rates are not the same rates they are now.
Yeah.
And so you have to constantly swivel and keep things moving. And one of the biggest mistakes a lot of investors make is they wait on the sideline and they say, oh, I'm going to wait till the rates go down back to that 2.5%. Yeah, but look at the opportunity cost you're going to lose. I don't know if we're ever going to get there again.
We're not.
But
I don't think
you're still missing good deals. Just look at the numbers. Do the math on that deal, and each individual deal makes different money.
Because there's still money to be made. Absolutely, yeah. There's still money to be made. So, what would be your give me like 2 tips that you would give investors or flippers, like as out of your experience? What are the 2 top things that you tell any investor or flipper that comes to you and says, how do I do this, or how do I get started, or what's the best way to go about it?
Identify your money. Identify your funding. If you are going to deal cash, then that's different. But that's still, you have to identify your funding. If your goal is to buy 10 properties and you have enough cash to buy 2, you might want to think about lending. You come up with your funding and how you're going to fund these deals, and then you come up with a matrix or a strategy. If you have 100,000, okay, maybe you buy an $80,000 house, fix it up, put a mortgage on it, pull that money out, and use that to buy 2 or 3, if that's your goal. Because obviously you have 100,000, and that gets spent one time, and you can't keep moving. But figure out, come up with a strategy on how you're going to get to your goal. The other advice is do your numbers. Don't be fooled by do your own math. Make sure the math makes sense to you. You might get an ARV that sounds ridiculous. Oh, if you turn this, if you fix this property up, the ARV is going to be 400,000. But look at what $400,000 properties look like, because you may not be scheduled to do the type of work to make that property worth 400,000. You may
to get the ARV,
to get that ARV, and then this is not easy. You got to get your team together.
I didn't know if you were going to touch it, but I was going to add it in as the third thing. Your team is
get your team.
Absolutely,
it's crucial. By team, not just your lender, not just your realtor, not just your attorney, your contractors. Yes, you got to get the people, your subs, your contractors. You have to know what they can do, know how they move. Can they float a draw? Can they not? When the money comes in, because if your project every month you spend, that's money lost. And you need to hurry up and either flip it, or you need to hurry up and get a tenant in there so you can start getting your money back. And those are all things that will delay the situation. And when you talk to your contractors and when you figure out your lenders, and you work with your lenders and your contractors, you'll figure out what works best for you. You may not be a gut rehab flipper. You may have to be a lipstick on a pig type flipper. You may have to, and nothing's wrong with that if you can see the value, because if you're not doing work that requires permits, that can save you a lot of time. If you're just updating and renovating, that can get you a lot of equity and save you some time. So you have to figure out what strategy you have. Don't spend your money too prematurely. Sit down and come up with a strategy. Get your price. It's all available. It's all commercially. I mean, not in commercial. You can get values very relatively inexpensive, but be real to yourself. Are you going to do that level of renovation that's selling 400,000, or are you going to do more of a rental ready situation where you have to be realistic that it might be a $300,000 ARV because you're not doing the tearing down the walls.
You're
and
not adding another
concept
$50,000, $100,000 worth of work. So
yeah.
But if I can make 100 or 50 or whatever the number is, if I can walk away with money, because that's what it all comes down to anyway. If there is profit to be made and it makes sense, and I don't have to go all in.
Absolutely. You do your math because you don't have to. Because I don't do this much.
I know you don't. You're the first person that kind of taught me everything doesn't have to be torn down or completely renovated, or you know what I'm saying. You can go in and just do the basics.
My niche is not HGTV type of style.
Yeah.
We had a deal.
I know.
We had a deal. I'm going to talk about this deal. We had a deal on Gresham.
Yep.
And you
the single family home, right?
Beautiful.
Yep.
Great.
Like 5 bedrooms, 2 to 3 baths,
something like that. With a tenant, though.
With a tenant,
with supposedly a problem tenant.
Yes.
Of course, nothing for me.
Yeah.
And the goal was to fix it up and flip it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sorry, to fix it up and rent it. Right. And I got in there, and the tenants weren't that bad. They were CHA. She was good. They were CHA tenants. They took care of the place. But what happened was the seller, the landlord, previous landlord, just didn't want to do some of the work involved. And I had no intentions of selling the place. I wanted to fix it up and rent it out. And I just went over there, treated the lady with respect. She pointed out all the issues with the property, and we fixed it. We gave her a safe environment. And she said, if I had known, I would stay with you. And it's like, you know what? Don't worry about it. You've already put your moving papers in. You wanted to leave because you had a landlord that wasn't treating you right. That's not us, but we understand. And we had a great situation. She said she wanted to stay, but she already started the process. And it worked out. It was a few months where we collected rent, and it worked out. And before we can really get that place fixed, well, what you do for me, Jillian?
I put it on the market.
You put it on the market.
You put it on the market.
I'm like, well, whatever happens.
Absolutely.
We're going to schedule to fix this up. We'll test the market, and somebody came in and took it off their hands for quickly. I think we had it for maybe what?
It was like a week or
4
2.
months. No,
you had it, 4
months. And did very little work, maintenance work on it. We fixed the furnace and painted and stopped the leaks to the upstairs. And
bathroom stuff.
And we didn't renovate anything. We just repaired and made it functional. And the purpose of me bringing that up was there was a desire to fix it up and make it nicer and increase the ARV. But there's always a market for somebody, and somebody saw that place the way it was. Rental condition, and they wanted it, and they're willing to pay for it, and it worked out. And it was impressive. It wasn't, we did far from breaking even. We did pretty good.
That wasn't the plan. But sometimes the plans change, and it still makes sense, right?
It made sense, and so that became a flip. That was started off as a hold, and we walked in and just turned it around. I think it was like just at 90 days. And then it was ready to go. But stuff like that happens, and it's good to be nimble. Where if opportunity comes, you can actually move on it. And that's what happened.
No, that was a great example. So, final question for you is, what are your plans on? I'm just curious because I haven't asked you this in a while. So, on the investment front, what's the next year look like for you? And then on the attorney front, what does the next year look like for you driving business, getting your name out more for evictions? What's the goal?
So on the attorney side, I've decided that we're going to deal with our capacity. We do all things real estate. And one thing I'm going to start doing is cutting back on some of the other offerings and stick just to closings and evictions. If we have clients, we will offer other services as wraparound services for existing clients. But, we want to focus on my expertise and really just drive that. And so, I'm hiring, I'm working on it. We have processes together, and it's been good, and it's one of those things I thought about because imagine an eviction attorney during COVID where we had 2 years of eviction moratorium. So, you had to keep something. Luckily, the closings were doing great at that time. But that's what I want to focus on the legal side. As far as an investor, things are coming in. And as an attorney, it's a little difficult because I don't get access to as many deals because as an attorney, I have a responsibility to my clients. So if you're ever worried that I'm going to compete with the client, no, I can't. I'm banned from doing that. Yeah. So if you ever contact me, you got to let me know. I'm contacting you because I need attorney services, or I'm contacting you because I have a deal. Once you say attorney services, everything you tell me, I cannot even play in it. There's so much out there. But yeah, I would love to get to 100 units. I focus on single families. I got rid of all my multi units, and now some of those multi units are coming back, and I'll entertain that. But it's a deal if it works. As the deals come in, I do the numbers, and if it works, I invest in it. And I would love to get to 100 units. I'm raising a young man, and I don't know what the world's going to be like in the future, and I don't know if properties are going to be as available as they used to be. You have a lot of companies coming into Chicago, and they're buying up all the real estate, and they're turning us into a rental city. So that's what I want to do. I just want to keep building, keep growing, knowing what I know, doubling down on what works, and helping people like you educate the masses, because it's I don't want to say it like I'm on the top, but when you move forward, you find out it's lonely at the top. You want more people with you.
And you have experience. I mean, not only from the legal side, but you're an investor. I mean, and that's a large part of what real estate is. People are looking for investments. Like I said, home ownership is an investment, or being a landlord, or a property flipper. So you've got experience in both. So your knowledge is invaluable. So tell people how they can get a hold of you. How can they find you?
Well, my firm is called the OD Firm, so it's just odfirm.com. If you need us for our legal services, that's www.odfirm.com. You can give us a call, 312-788-7368, and just let us know. Call us and let us know what you're looking for. You can actually even text to our office also. I have great staff that will weed the situation out. But just make sure you detail what's going on. If you want us to help you with a closing, you can send it to us. I think so it's all@odfirm.com is the email that you can send it to, and we'll gladly analyze the situation. If you're a landlord looking for some advice, just let us know what your scenario is. Let us know your name and what your scenario is. We have to do, obviously, a conflict check first, and then we'll get back to you and let you know what we think.
Nice. And we'll put all of those details, your contact information, out on social media and attach it to the stream so people have it. So thank you so much, Chuks, for coming and joining us today. Your insights have been incredibly valuable, especially for landlords and investors trying to navigate the often complicated world of real estate. I know our listeners, especially those new to investing, will benefit greatly from everything you shared. To all our listeners, remember, real estate is not just about buying properties, it's about protecting your investments. Having the right team, including a knowledgeable real estate attorney and broker, I have to plug to myself, can make all the difference. Don't forget, if you missed part of today's episode, you can catch the replay on intellectualradio.com, their YouTube channel, iHeartRadio, and across my social media platforms. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Inner Circle podcast, where real estate meets real life. I'm your host, Jillian. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep building towards your real estate goals.